Jonathan Blake here. What happens when the President of the United States sues the most powerful bank in America for $5 billion? This isn't just a legal fight between Donald Trump and JPMorgan Chase. It's a battle over who really controls access to the financial system, elected leaders or unelected banking giants. When a bank can shut down your accounts without explanation, the issue isn't politics anymore. It's power. And this case could determine whether debanking is legitimate risk management or a quiet tool of financial control that affects far more than one former president. If you want clear breakdowns of the stories that actually shape how power works in America, hit like and subscribe. Because what's unfolding here goes way beyond headlines. It touches every person who depends on a bank to live, work, and survive in the modern economy. Let's break this down. What happens when the President of the United States takes on the biggest bank in America? On January 22, 2026, President Donald Trump filed a $5 billion lawsuit against JPMorgan Chase and its CEO, Jamie Dimon. This wasn't about a bad loan or a business disagreement. Trump is suing because the bank closed his accounts, something most people don't realize can happen to anyone. This lawsuit shows just how much control banks have over people's lives, businesses, and ability to use the financial system. The effects of this case go far beyond Trump himself. According to court papers filed in Florida, Trump claims that in February 2021, JPMorgan suddenly told him and several of his businesses that their accounts would be shut down within 60 days. These were accounts he had used for decades. This happened about 1 month after the January 6th Capitol riot. Trump says the bank closed his accounts because of his political views. This practice is called debanking. The lawsuit makes two main claims under Florida law. First, Trump says JPMorgan treated him unfairly by discriminating against him for his political beliefs. Second, he claims the bank hurt his reputation by putting him, his businesses, and family members on a blacklist that was shared with other banks. This list was supposedly meant for customers involved in wrongdoing. JPMorgan says the lawsuit has no merit. The bank stated that it does not close accounts for political or religious reasons. Instead, they say they close accounts that create legal or regulatory risk for the company. This isn't the only lawsuit of its kind. Trump's company also sued Capital One in March 2025, claiming that bank wrongly shut down more than 300 of their accounts. That case is still going through the courts. To understand why this matters, you need to know what debanking means. Debanking happens when banks close people's accounts because they think those customers are too risky in terms of finances, legal issues, regulations, or reputation. Banks have always had the right to refuse service. That's the law. But the rules heavily favor banks. They usually don't have to explain why they close an account. Customers often never find out the real reason. In Trump's case, JPMorgan gave him 60 days' notice, but no explanation. This issue became a major political topic during Trump's second term as president. In August 2025, he signed an order called Guaranteeing Fair Banking for All Americans. This order told federal banking regulators to investigate and stop debanking practices. In December 2025, these regulators found that 9 of the biggest banks in the country had treated some customers unfairly based on their type of business. Industries like oil and gas, private prisons, and adult entertainment reportedly had trouble getting bank services. However, banks argue they aren't making these decisions randomly. They say they're responding to pressure from regulators. Laws against money laundering and requirements to know their customers push banks to end relationships they see as risky. The KO Institute, a research organization, noted that proving political debanking is hard because banks rarely write down political reasons for their decisions. They usually just say they have risk or regulatory concerns. So, when JPMorgan closed Trump's accounts in February 2021, was it political payback? Was it risk management after January 6th? Or was it following unspoken rules from regulators? That's what this lawsuit will try to figure out. Here's what happened step by step. On January 6, 2021, Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building to disrupt a certification of the 2020 election results. In February 2021, JPMorgan told Trump his accounts would be closed. By April 2021, the accounts were officially shut down. Trump waited almost 5 years to file this lawsuit. Trump's legal case has two main parts. The first claim is that JPMorgan broke Florida's law against unfair business practices. Florida law says businesses can't discriminate against customers for their political views. Legal experts say if Trump can prove his accounts were closed only because of his politics, he would likely win this part of the case. But there's a gray area. If someone's political views were so extreme that they hurt the bank's reputation, that might give the bank legal grounds to close the account. The lawsuit will likely focus on this question. Were Trump's views mainstream, given that over 70 million people voted for him in 2020? Or did January 6th create a real risk for JPMorgan? The second claim is about trade lile, which means hurting someone's business reputation. Trump says JPMorgan put him on an internal blacklist for customers involved in bad behavior, then shared this list with other banks. This supposedly made it harder for Trump to get banking services elsewhere. Trump told reporters that, after JPMorgan closed his accounts, he had to move hundreds of millions of dollars to small banks all over the country within just 20 days. This claim will be hard to prove because trade lile usually requires showing that someone badmouthed your product or service to gain an advantage over you. JPMorgan isn't competing with Trump. There's another complication. In February 2024, a New York judge found Trump and his businesses liable for civil fraud in a case brought by the state's attorney general. The case said Trump lied about how much his properties were worth to get better loan terms. Initially, he faced a penalty of more than $500 million. But in August 2025, an appeals court threw out that penalty while still saying the fraud happened. Both sides are still fighting over this case. This matters because if a court found Trump committed fraud, that might give JPMorgan a legitimate reason to close his accounts for legal risk. JPMorgan's defense is carefully worded. The bank didn't deny closing Trump's accounts. They didn't give specific reasons. They just said they close accounts that create legal or regulatory risk. The bank also said it has been asking different administrations to change the rules that put them in this difficult position. Essentially, JPMorgan is saying they're stuck between regulators who expect them to monitor risk and politicians who accuse them of discrimination. Now let's look at what this really means. On the surface, this is about Trump and JPMorgan, but underneath it's about power, control, and who gets to use the financial system. There's an interesting contradiction here. Trump's government is suing Wall Street banks while also giving them huge breaks on regulations. Trump's financial regulators are expected to finalize changes that could free up as much as $200 billion for the biggest banks. This is the banking industry's biggest policy win in more than 10 years. The 8 largest banks increased their lobbying spending by almost 40% in late 2025. So banks are winning on regulations, but they're losing on public image and political goodwill. Consider what happened just days before the lawsuit. At a major economic conference on January 21, 2026, Trump called on Congress to cap credit card interest rates at 10% for 1 year. He said this would help Americans save for homes. Jamie Dimon's response was blunt. He said the proposal would be an economic disaster and would cause millions of Americans to lose access to credit as banks stopped lending. This public fight set the stage for the lawsuit. Here's the deeper question. Banks have enormous power. If you can't get bank services, you basically can't participate in modern life. You can't take digital payments, you can't get loans, you can't invest. Sometimes you can't even get paid for your work. This power used to be balanced by competition. If one bank refused you, you could go to another. But as banks have merged and grown larger, that's changed. JPMorgan is the biggest bank in America. If they blacklist you and share that information with other banks, your options shrink dramatically. Whether JPMorgan actually did this remains to be proven, but the possibility shows a troubling reality. Getting debanked can destroy your financial life, and there's no clear legal solution. Banks can claim risk management. Customers can claim discrimination. Both might be telling the truth. The law hasn't caught up with this problem. Trump has made debanking a key issue of his second term. His August 2025 order was meant to protect conservatives from financial discrimination, but the December 2025 findings showed that debanking affected many different industries, not just conservative-owned businesses. Critics say Trump is using the debanking story to play the victim and energize his supporters. Supporters say he's exposing real corporate bias that the media ignores. The facts are these. JPMorgan closed Trump's accounts in 2021, shortly after January 6th. Trump was not president at the time. JPMorgan hasn't explained the closure beyond mentioning legal and regulatory risk. Trump says it was political. The bank says it wasn't. Both sides will present their evidence in court. So, why should you care about this? Maybe you're not a billionaire or involved in politics. This matters because it sets a precedent. If Trump wins, it will encourage others to challenge bank account closures. People and businesses denied banking services will have a path to fight back. That's good if you believe banks shouldn't have unlimited power to kick people out of the system without explanation. But if Trump loses, it will confirm what many suspect. Banks can close your accounts for vague risk reasons with almost no accountability. That's concerning because it means your access to banking could disappear if your business, politics, or connections fall out of favor. This isn't just about Trump. According to research, debanking affects gun shop owners, cannabis businesses, cryptocurrency companies, adult entertainers, political activists on both the left and right, and countless small businesses in unclear regulatory areas. The problem is built into the system. Banks don't like risk. Regulators are demanding. Together, this creates an environment where whole categories of legal businesses struggle to get basic financial services. If banks face many lawsuits from customers claiming discrimination, they'll respond in one of two ways. Either they'll be more careful and stop closing accounts so quickly, which could increase their own risk, or they'll close accounts even faster and build stronger legal defenses, making it harder for legitimate customers to fight back. Neither outcome is ideal. Where does this go from here? The case was filed in Florida State Court. JPMorgan will likely try to move it to federal court, which is usually better for big companies. If the case stays in state court, JPMorgan will probably try to get it thrown out by arguing that Trump's claims are too weak. If Trump survives that, the case moves to discovery, where his lawyers can demand JPMorgan's internal documents and question bank executives. This is where things get interesting. Discovery could reveal what JPMorgan employees actually said about closing Trump's accounts. Were there discussions about politics, about January 6th, about pressure from regulators, or was it purely about risk? If Trump gets to discovery, JPMorgan will be under huge pressure to settle before those documents become public. Trump is asking for $5 billion. That's an enormous number, but the actual damages depend on the real harm caused. Trump says the account closures forced him to scramble to move hundreds of millions of dollars to smaller banks, causing financial and reputation damage. Proving that harm with numbers will be difficult. It's worth noting that Trump has filed several lawsuits against media companies since returning to office. At least 2 of those cases settled quickly. This suggests Trump's legal strategy might be less about winning in court and more about forcing settlements and making a point. Beyond the courtroom, this case could change how regulators handle debanking. Trump's order told regulators to investigate. Those investigations are ongoing. If federal agencies find that banks have systematically discriminated against conservatives or any other group, they could impose fines or new rules requiring banks to explain account closures. But this creates a problem. Banks say they're closing accounts because of regulatory pressure. If new regulations force them to justify every closure, their costs will go up. Banks might respond by refusing to open accounts for anyone in a slightly risky category, making the problem worse instead of better. Sometimes trying to fix a problem creates new problems that are harder to solve. Politically, this case will fuel Trump's message that he's fighting powerful institutions on behalf of regular Americans. Whether that's accurate is debatable, but it works politically. Meanwhile, Jaime Dimon is in a tough spot. If he settles, it looks like JPMorgan gave in to political pressure. If he fights, the case drags on and might expose embarrassing internal communications. Neither choice is good. And there's more to consider. Trump has publicly criticized other bank CEOs, accused Goldman Sachs of bias, and sued Capital One. He has said Bank of America refused to give him an account. If Trump wins against JPMorgan, he could file similar lawsuits against other banks. If he loses, the issue might fade. Either way, Wall Street is watching this case very closely. On the surface, this is about a president suing a bank, but underneath, it's about power. Who has it? Who uses it? And who gets shut out when institutions decide you're too risky or too controversial? Trump's lawsuit raises big questions that affect everyone. Can banks deny you service without explanation? Should they have to justify closing accounts? What happens when access to money becomes a way to control people politically or socially? These aren't easy questions. Banks aren't charities. Their business is managing risk in a heavily regulated world. But they're also gatekeepers to the modern economy. If they close your accounts, your financial life stops. The lawsuit will work its way through the courts. Discovery will happen or it won't. There will be a settlement or a trial. But no matter the outcome, the underlying tension remains. Trump is weakening Wall Street, regulations while also challenging Wall Street's power. Wall Street is winning on policy while losing on public perception. And the rest of us are watching a clash between two powerful forces that rarely face public accountability. Here's what we know for sure. Banks closed Trump's accounts. Trump says it was political. JPMorgan says it was risk management. The court will decide who's right. But here's what the court can't decide. Whether the current system, where banks can kick people out of financial services with almost no oversight, works for a free society. That's a question that goes beyond lawsuits, beyond politics, beyond Trump and Diamond. It's a question about how power works in the modern world, and it's a question we'll all have to answer. If you want to stay ahead of stories like this, stories that matter more than the headlines suggest, hit subscribe. Because the collision between political power and financial power isn't slowing down. If anything, it's just getting started.